When my son-in-law poured a glass of wine on me at a lavish dinner party, he thought he was teaching me a lesson, humiliating me, an old woman, in front of all his friends. He expected screaming, tears, or at least a scene. He had no idea that a single drop of red wine dripping down my dress was the signal for his end to begin. I didn't utter a single word, but my silence hid the biggest secret that my late husband had left for me. My name is Charlotte Hayes, and at 62 years old, I'm a recent widow navigating a world that seems to have moved on without me. Not that my family has noticed, of course. They are all far too consumed with their own little empires and social performances. Today was supposed to be a small step toward reclaiming a sense of normalcy, a way of honoring the life I once had. My daughter, Jessica, was hosting her annual dinner party, a lavish spectacle where her husband, my son-in-law Mark, holds court like a king with his latest acquisitions and self-congratulatory anecdotes. I'm typically relegated to the background, an inconvenient shadow from a less prosperous time. But this time I had a mission. My late husband, Robert, always loved a good gathering. He believed it was a chance to connect, to share stories, to find joy in simple things. In his memory, I decided to bake his favorite dessert, a classic apple pie with a cinnamon lattice crust. I remembered the last time I made it for him. His face had lit up and he declared it tasted like pure, unadulterated happiness. I wanted to bring a little bit of that happiness back, to share a piece of him with the family. I spent 2 days in my kitchen, my sanctuary, mixing flour, sugar, and the comforting nostalgia of our life together. The crust was impeccably flaky, the apples perfectly tart, and the aroma filled my car on the way over, a fragrant hug on a cold and different evening. When I arrived, their home was, as always, a monument to a life of excess. Marble floors, glittering chandeliers, and a crowd of people whose polished smiles never quite reached their eyes. I found Jessica in the kitchen, a whirlwind of commands, directing caterers with the precision of a field marshal. I waited for a lull. "Honey, I brought your father's favorite," I said, my voice softer than the pie's crust. She gave me a brief, forced smile, her eyes already scanning the room for something else. "Oh, Mom, that's sweet. Just put it on the counter, I guess." No thank you, no genuine warmth. I was a detail to be managed, not a person to be cherished. I placed the pie next to a pristine, untouched fruit platter. It felt small and homely, almost an anachronism in this sterile environment. But I didn't care. It was a tribute to Robert and a quiet victory for me. I did it for myself. I did it because I still believe in the power of a simple, kind gesture, even if others have forgotten how to appreciate them. Then I navigated the social minefield of the living room, a sea of designer suits and little black dresses. Mark, my son-in-law, was holding court by the fireplace, his laughter a little too loud, his gestures a little too grand. He spotted me, and his smile tightened. Mark has always viewed me as a nuisance, a poor relic from a past he wants to erase. He values people based on their financial statements, and since I'm a widow on a fixed income, my worth in his eyes is exactly zero. "Charlotte, you made it." But it sounded like a reprimand. "I hope you didn't bring one of your home-baked creations. We have a caterer tonight." He didn't wait for my response, turning his back to me to engage in some self-important conversation. The message was clear. My pie, my gesture of love, was a pathetic, low-class artifact in his perfect, polished world. A familiar sting of indignation flashed through me, but I swallowed it down. I was here for Jessica, not for his approval. My gaze fell on my granddaughter, Lily, sitting alone in a quiet corner, looking lost and overwhelmed. She's only 8, and these parties are always too much for her sensitive spirit. I went over and sat beside her, putting a comforting arm around her small shoulders. "It's a bit much, isn't it, sweetheart?" I whispered. She nodded, her eyes wide with a quiet distress. "They're all so loud, Grandma." "Don't worry," I said. "I have something for you." From my purse, I pulled out a small, beautifully wrapped box. It was a vintage locket that I had found at an antique shop, a simple but elegant piece with a tiny butterfly engraving on the front. I had planned to give it to her on her birthday, but seeing her so miserable, I couldn't wait. Her face instantly brightened as she opened it. "Grandma, it's so beautiful!" she exclaimed, a genuine smile finally replacing her tense expression. Just then, Mark, wine glass in hand, sauntered over. He looked down at me, his face a mask of patronizing disapproval. "What are you doing over here, Charlotte? This isn't the kiddie table. And what did you give her? Please tell me it's not another one of your garage sale trinkets." I just smiled faintly. "It's a gift, Mark, something I thought she would like." He scoffed and took a large gulp of his wine, a deep, blood-red Cabernet. "You know, your little gifts are starting to be an embarrassment. We have nice things now, Charlotte. You should learn to act the part. It's a party, for goodness sake." I felt the anger boiling, a hot wave of indignation. The sheer condescension, the belittling tone, it was all too much. I looked him dead in the eyes. "Some things have more value than money, Mark. Maybe you should remember that." He laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "Oh, please, spare me the wisdom of the impoverished. It's pathetic." He took another swig, his eyes glinting with malice. "You know, you're just a burden, Charlotte, a relic from a time when we weren't rich. Now, why don't you go home and let the adults handle this?" And then it happened. He gestured with his wine glass, a grand sweeping motion meant to dismiss me, but his hand slipped. The entire contents of the glass, the dark red liquid, arced through the air and landed squarely on my pale blue silk dress. A perfect spreading stain. A cruel joke. Everyone in the room turned to look. The laughter died down, replaced by a stunned, awkward silence. Mark just stared, a flicker of something almost like satisfaction on his face. He didn't even apologize. This was no accident. The look in his eyes told me that much. It was a calculated act of humiliation, a way to put me in my place, to show everyone just how worthless he thought I was. The beautiful dress, one of the last my late husband had bought me, was ruined. The fabric, once a symbol of his love and my elegance, was now a canvas for his scorn. The warmth I felt from Lily's hug and the pride in my tie was instantly washed away by the cold, acidic feeling of the wine and the colder sting of his cruelty. My mind raced. How could someone be so heartless? My own son-in-law, a man that I had welcomed into our family, a man that married my daughter, a man that I had trusted with my daughter's happiness. I had always suspected he was a snake, but I never imagined he'd strike at me in such a public, venomous way. I could tell you so much more about what happened next, but you'll just have to subscribe to find out. I don't know what to do. Should I confront him and risk making a bigger scene? Was this an honest accident or a deliberate attack? What could I possibly do to get through to someone so heartless? The silence was a physical thing, thick and suffocating. Mark's cruel smirk was a gaping wound in the opulent room. My daughter, Jessica, finally broke the spell, a panicked look on her face. "Mark, what in the world? Mom, are you okay?" Her voice was a nervous squeak, not of concern for me, but for the scene he had created. He just shrugged, still smirking. "An accident, darling. The old woman is just clumsy." He called me the old woman, right in front of everyone, as if I weren't even there. It was in that moment, with the sticky, sour wine seeping into my dress and the cold indifference of my daughter and son-in-law, that a switch flipped inside me. The grief,
The sadness, the feeling of being a helpless burden, it all burned away, replaced by a white-hot anger. I wasn't going to stand for this, not anymore. I stood up slowly, deliberately, my gaze fixed on Mark. The guests were murmuring, some looking at me with pity, others with a kind of detached amusement. My granddaughter, Lily, saw the change in me. Her small hand gripped mine tightly, a silent show of support. "It's okay, Grandma," she whispered, her eyes full of worry. I squeezed her hand back, giving her a reassuring smile. I wasn't going to yell, wasn't going to cry. That's what they expected. They expected me to be the weak, pathetic old woman who would retreat into a corner and lick her wounds. But I wasn't that person anymore. I looked at Mark, his expensive suit and smug face, and a thought hit me. A terrible, wonderful thought. I had a secret that could bring his whole world crashing down. I had found it a few months ago while going through Robert's old files. A small, unassuming envelope with Mark's name on it, marked confidential. Inside, there were documents that revealed his entire company was a house of cards. He had been embezzling money from his own business partners for years, and he was dangerously close to being exposed. Robert, a savvy businessman himself, had been asked to invest, but he had done his due diligence and found the truth. He never told anyone, not even me, but he had kept the proof. And now, that proof was in my hands. Mark had no idea. He thought I was just a harmless, grieving widow. He saw me as a faded photograph, a ghost of the past. He never suspected that I had the power to not only ruin his business, but also destroy his reputation, his social standing, and his marriage to my daughter. I looked down at the wine-stained dress, a symbol of his public humiliation of me. And then I looked back at him, a tiny, defiant smile forming on my lips. "You know, Mark," I said, my voice low and steady, "you're right. I am a relic from the past, and the past has a funny way of catching up with people." His smug expression faltered for a second, a flicker of uncertainty. He asked, "What are you talking about, Eleanor?" using my name with a sneer. I just stared at him, my eyes hard. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of a full answer. Not yet. I had to choose my next move carefully. I needed to get out of this house, but I wasn't going to leave in shame. I wasn't going to let him win. I walked past him, a quiet and dignified force of nature. I knew what I was going to do, and I knew it would be a hell of a show. I could feel his eyes on my back, a mix of confusion and irritation. He had tried to crush me, but he had only awakened a monster. And this monster had a plan. A glorious, beautiful, perfectly executed plan. This wasn't just about a dinner party. It was the first battle in a war, and I wasn't going to lose. What he did to me was unforgivable. I needed to figure out how to expose him without hurting my daughter. Was it even possible? Was it worth the risk? What if I'm wrong? I can't let him get away with it, but I need to do it right. I need to make sure I don't lose everything in the process.
After leaving the party, I drove home in a daze, the cold, sticky wine on my dress feeling like a brand of shame. But as I pulled into my quiet driveway, the shame began to curdle into something else, a cold, hard resolve. I sat in the car for a long time, the engine idling, the soft glow of my porch light beckoning me inside. I felt a wave of loneliness wash over me. For so long, I had been the family matriarch, the one everyone came to for advice, comfort, and of course, a loan. Now, with Robert gone, I was just an inconvenience, a discarded piece of furniture they had no use for. My house, a modest but comfortable 2-story home, was a testament to our life together. Every piece of furniture, every photograph on the wall held a story. The worn armchair where Robert would read his newspaper,
The kitchen table where we'd spent countless hours with Jessica, helping her with homework and listening to her dreams. It was a home built on love, not on Mark's ill-gotten gains, and he wanted to take it from me, just by making me feel small and worthless. But he couldn't take my memories. He couldn't take my resolve. I went inside, changed out of my ruined dress, and poured myself a cup of tea. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a suppressed rage that was simmering just beneath the surface. I looked at my reflection in the dark kitchen window. The woman staring back at me was not the same woman who had left the house 2 hours earlier with a fresh baked pie. Her eyes, usually soft and kind, were now hard and focused. She had been pushed too far. I knew what I had to do. I went to the small mahogany desk in the living room, the one Robert had used for his business affairs. I unlocked the bottom drawer with a key I kept on my keychain and pulled out the unassuming envelope marked confidential. My hands were steady now. Inside were photocopies of bank statements, emails, and a few handwritten notes in Mark's scrawling, arrogant hand. Robert, being a meticulous man, had even compiled a brief report detailing Mark's fraudulent activities. The paper crackled in my hands, a silent witness to a crime. As I read through the documents again, a sickening sense of clarity washed over me. Mark wasn't just a snob. He was a thief. He was stealing from his own company, a company he had built on a foundation of lies. The money he used to buy his lavish house, his expensive cars, his art collection, it was all a sham. He was living a lie, a carefully constructed illusion of success. And my daughter, my sweet, naive Jessica, was trapped in his web. She had no idea that the man she had married was a con artist. I felt a pang of sadness for my daughter. Jessica had always been easily manipulated, especially by men who offered her the promise of a perfect life. I had tried to warn her about Mark, to tell her that his charm was a mask for something cold and calculating, but she never listened. Now she was part of his deceit. I knew she wasn't in on it, but she would be implicated by association. I had to protect her. But how? I couldn't just go to the police. If I did, Mark would go to jail, and Jessica would be left with nothing. She would lose the house, the cars, everything. I didn't want to see her suffer for his crimes. I needed to find a way to expose Mark without completely ruining my daughter's life. As I sat there, a thought began to form. A memory, really. I remembered a conversation Robert had with a friend, a high-powered attorney named David, who specialized in corporate fraud cases. Robert had told me that David was a master at handling these kinds of situations quietly, without a huge public scandal. He was known for making sure his clients got what they deserved, but he also had a knack for protecting the innocent bystanders caught in the firecross. I decided I would call him first thing in the morning. I wasn't going to let Mark get away with this, but I was going to do it on my own terms. I was going to play his game, but with my own rules. The sting of the wine on my skin, the look of satisfaction on Mark's face, it all fueled my determination. I wasn't going to be the victim anymore. I was going to be the victor. What I didn't know then was that Mark was already a step ahead of me. He had been watching me, suspicious of my quiet demeanor and my newfound confidence. He knew I had something on him, but he didn't know what. And he was already planning his next move to make sure I never used it. What happens when you challenge a man with nothing to lose? You're about to find out. I spent the rest of the night tossing and turning, unable to sleep. My mind was racing with a million different scenarios, each one more terrifying than the last. What if I was wrong about Mark? What if he was just a clumsy, arrogant man and not a criminal? What if the documents I had were fakes? The thought, though fleeting, sent a chill down my spine. But then I remembered the look in his eyes at the party, the cold, calculated malice. That look was real. The man was a snake. The sun rose, a pale, anemic thing that did little to warm the morning air. I got up, made a pot of coffee, and pulled out the phone book, my fingers trembling slightly as I searched for David's number. I found it tucked away in the back, a small, handwritten note from Robert. He had a knack for being prepared for every eventuality, a trait I was now incredibly grateful for. I dialed the number, my heart pounding in my chest. The phone rang once, twice, and then a gruff, tired voice answered. David Cohen. I took a deep breath. Hello, David. My name is Charlotte Hayes. I'm a friend of Robert Hayes, my late husband. Silence on the other end. I felt a surge of panic. Had I said something wrong? I'm sorry to bother you so early, but I have a situation. It involves my son-in-law, Mark. I know who you are, Charlotte, David said, his voice softening slightly. Robert spoke very highly of you. Said you were a smart woman. What's going on? I hesitated for a moment, then decided to just lay it all out. I have documents that show Mark has been embezzling from his company. Robert found them a few months before he died. I think Mark knows I have them, and he's been trying to intimidate me. David was silent for a long moment. Then he sighed, a long, weary sound. I knew that boy was trouble. Robert told me he was looking into him, but he didn't give me the details. I wish he had. Can you help me? I asked, my voice a small, desperate plea. I can, he said, but it won't be easy. This is a big case, Charlotte, and Mark is not a man to be trifled with. He's powerful and he's ruthless. You need to be prepared for a fight. I'm prepared, I said, and I was surprised at how steady my voice sounded. He humiliated me in front of my own family. I'm not going to let him get away with it. Good, David said. I'm glad to hear you have some fire in you. Come to my office at noon. Bring the documents with you. We'll go over everything and we'll come up with a plan. I hung up the phone, a newfound sense of purpose coursing through my veins. The shame, the loneliness, the grief, it was all gone, replaced by a cold, righteous anger. Mark had made a mistake, a very big mistake. He had underestimated me. He had thought I was a pathetic old woman who would crumble under pressure. He was about to learn that old women have secrets too, and some secrets are worth fighting for. What I didn't know was that while I was on the phone with David, Mark was already putting his own plan into motion. He had a source, someone close to me, who had been feeding him information about my every move. He knew I had the documents. He knew I was going to call David. He knew everything. And he was already planning his next move to make sure I never used that information against him. You need to be ready for the most shocking moment of this story, because it's about to happen.
The anxiety that had been a dull throb in my stomach all morning solidified into a cold, hard knot as I drove toward David's office. The city's midday traffic, a chaotic symphony of horns and impatient drivers, did little to soothe my nerves. I kept replaying my conversation with David in my head, his warnings about Mark's ruthlessness echoing in my ears. He was right. Mark was a predator, and I was about to walk into his territory with nothing but a flimsy envelope of photocopies and a heart full of righteous anger. Was I really cut out for this? This wasn't a game of chess. This was a game of survival, and I was just an old woman who knew how to bake a killer apple pie. The thought was enough to make me want to turn the car around and go back to my quiet, lonely life. But then I remembered the look on Mark's face, the satisfaction in his eyes as he watched the wine stains spread on my dress. That memory, more than any amount of courage, was what kept my foot on the gas. David's office was located in a sleek, modern building downtown, the kind of place where you have to show an ID to a security guard who looks like he could snap you in half. I felt a pang of nostalgia for Robert's old office, a cozy, wood-paneled room that smelled of old paper and pipe tobacco. This place felt sterile, cold, and a little bit intimidating. I was told to take a seat, and as I waited, I couldn't help but notice the other people in the waiting room. They all looked so polished, so confident.
I felt 100 years old in my sensible shoes and simple dress. I clutched the envelope in my hand, its edges worn from my nervous grip. It felt like a ticking bomb. Finally, the door opened, and a young woman with a crisp, professional demeanor called my name. I followed her into a large office with a wall of windows that overlooked the city. David was sitting behind a massive desk, his face a grim mask. He gestured to the chair in front of him. "Charlotte, come in, have a seat." I sat down, my heart pounding a rhythm against my ribs. "I brought the documents," I said, placing the envelope on his desk. He didn't touch it. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on me. "Before we look at these, I need you to be completely honest with me. Do you have any idea how your husband came to have these? Did he tell you anything about what he was doing?" I hesitated for a moment. "He didn't tell me anything directly," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "He was a very private man, but I found them a few months ago while I was cleaning out his office. There were some notes, too. He was worried about Mark. He said he had a bad feeling about him." David nodded slowly. "I see. He was a smart man, your husband. He had a knack for sniffing out a rat." He finally picked up the envelope, his fingers carefully opening the flap. He pulled out the documents, a stack of papers, and a small notepad with Robert's neat, meticulous handwriting. As he read, his face grew more and more grim. This is a lot worse than I thought," he muttered, shaking his head. "He's not just a con artist, Charlotte. He's a professional. This is a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. We're talking about serious prison time." I felt a wave of nausea. A multi-million-dollar fraud scheme? I had known it was bad, but I hadn't known it was this bad. "What does this mean?" I asked, my voice trembling. "It means that if we go public with this, Mark's life is over. The SEC will be all over him. He'll lose everything. The house, the cars, the art, all of it will be seized." I felt a pang of fear. But what about Jessica? What will happen to her? David sighed. "She'll be a victim, Charlotte. She won't go to jail, but she'll lose everything. And she'll be a pariah in her social circle. She'll be ostracized. It's a risk we'll have to take." I sat there stunned. This was my worst fear, ruining my daughter's life to save her from a monster. It felt like a cruel paradox. "Is there any other way?" I asked, my voice a desperate plea. He shook his head. "Not if you want to bring him down. He's too smart, too careful. He's covered his tracks. This is the only way." I felt the tears welling up in my eyes. I had come here for justice, for revenge, but I hadn't considered the cost. I had been so focused on Mark's humiliation, on my own sense of betrayal, that I hadn't stopped to think about the collateral damage. My own daughter would be caught in the crossfire, and it would be my fault. "I can't do it," I said, the words raw and painful. "I can't ruin her life." David looked at me, a glimmer of sympathy in his eyes. "I understand, Charlotte, but you need to understand something. If you don't do this, Mark will continue to hurt people. He'll find a way to get rid of these documents. He'll find a way to silence you. You're not just fighting for yourself anymore. You're fighting for your family." His words hit me like a physical blow. He was right. Mark wasn't going to stop. He was a snake, and he would keep striking until I was dead or defeated. I couldn't let him win, but I also couldn't destroy my daughter. I was trapped. Little did I know, Mark was watching my every move. He had already figured out what I was up to, and he had a plan to stop me. What he did next was something I never could have seen coming, a move so low and so cruel, it would shake me to my very core. The meeting with David had left me reeling, my mind a storm of conflicting emotions. I drove home in a fog. the city's chaotic energy doing nothing to ground me. I was a woman caught between a rock and a hard place. On one hand, I had the power to expose a fraud, to bring a man who had publicly humiliated me to his knees. On the other hand, doing so would devastate my daughter, the one person in the world I was supposed to protect. It was a no-win situation. I felt a wave of despair wash over me. I wanted to just go home, crawl into bed, and pretend none of this was happening. But I knew I couldn't. I pulled into my driveway, and as I got out of the car, I noticed something strange. The front door was ajar. A cold, heavy dread settled in the pit of my stomach. I never leave my door unlocked. I approached the house cautiously, my heart pounding in my ears. I pushed the door open, my hands shaking. "Hello?" I called out, my voice a mere whisper. No answer. I walked into the living room, my eyes scanning the familiar space. Nothing seemed out of place. The furniture was all there. The photos on the mantelpiece were still standing straight. I let out a sigh of relief. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe I had forgotten to lock the door in my haste to get to David's office. But then I saw it. The small, unassuming mahogany desk, the one where I had kept Robert's files. The bottom drawer was open, and the key, which I had carefully placed back on my keychain, was gone. My blood ran cold. He had been here. Mark had been here. He had broken into my house and stolen the documents. My heart hammered against my ribs, a wild, panicked rhythm. How could he have known? How did he know I had the documents? And how did he get the key? My mind raced, trying to piece together the puzzle. And then it hit me. The only person who had access to my house, the only person who knew where I kept my spare key, was my daughter, Jessica. The realization was a punch to the gut, a betrayal so deep and so profound it left me breathless. It wasn't Mark who had stolen the key. It was my own daughter. She had betrayed me. She had been feeding him information about my every move. She knew I had the documents, and she had helped him get them. The thought was unbearable. I sank into the nearest armchair, the world spinning around me. My daughter, the one person I thought I could trust, the one person I had been trying to protect. She had sold me out. I felt a new kind of despair, one that was far worse than the fear of Mark's wrath. This was a soul-deep pain, a grief that was far more potent than the grief I had felt for my husband. I had lost my daughter. She was gone, replaced by a stranger, a co-conspirator in Mark's lies. I had been a fool. I had thought I could save her from him, but she didn't want to be saved. She was a part of his world now. She was as ruthless and as cold as he was. I don't know what to do. My only hope, the only leverage I had against Mark, was gone. And it was my daughter who had taken it. The irony was so bitter it made me want to scream. I had been so worried about hurting her, and all the while, she had been hurting me. The feeling of helplessness was a suffocating blanket, and I felt the last shreds of my courage slipping away. I had lost. Mark had won, and I had lost my daughter in the process. This was the lowest moment of my life, but what I didn't know was that this was just the beginning. The biggest twist was still to come, something that would change everything I thought I knew about my family.
The shock was a physical blow, leaving me gasping for air in my own living room. My daughter, the one I had raised, the one I had dedicated my life to, she had betrayed me. I sat there, numb, the emptiness of the open desk drawer staring back at me, a gaping maw of treachery. My mind, usually so sharp, felt like a broken record, replaying the same agonizing thought. Jessica, how could she? The rage I had felt earlier was gone, replaced by a deep, hollow ache. It was a grief far more potent than the one from my husband. He was gone,
but his love for me remained. My daughter was alive, but her love, or what I thought was love, was gone, replaced by greed and ambition. The irony of my situation was a cruel joke. I had been so worried about protecting her from Mark's inevitable downfall, and all the while, she had been working to ensure my own. I called David, my voice a shaky whisper. They got them. He was here. And Jessica, she helped him. There was a long silence on the other end. I'm so sorry, Charlotte, he said, his voice full of genuine sympathy. I had a feeling something like this might happen. Mark is more connected than you think. He's a dangerous man. What do I do now? I asked, a sense of helplessness washing over me. The documents are gone. He's won. He hasn't won yet, David said, his voice firm. We still have a chance. Do you remember the notepad you mentioned, the one with Robert's handwriting? I closed my eyes, trying to recall the details. Yes, I said. It was with the photocopies. He took it. He didn't take the original, David said, his voice a low growl. Robert was a meticulous man, Charlotte. He would never have given you the only copies of something so important. He would have a backup, a safe deposit box, a locked file cabinet, something. My heart, which had felt like a dead thing in my chest, began to beat a frantic rhythm. A backup, of course. Robert had a system for everything, a safe deposit box. He had mentioned it once, a small, unassuming box at a bank downtown. I had never had any reason to visit it before, but now it felt like my last hope. I think I know where it is, I said, a glimmer of hope returning. A bank downtown. He had a safe deposit box there. Good. Get over there as soon as you can. But be careful. Don't tell anyone what you're doing. Not your daughter, not your friends, not even me. Just go and get what's inside. And then, and only then, call me. I hung up the phone, a newfound sense of purpose coursing through my veins. Mark had underestimated me once again. He thought he had taken everything, but he hadn't. Robert, even in death, had a way of protecting me. It was a beautiful, heartbreaking thought. My husband, a man who loved me so fiercely, had foreseen this. He had made sure that even if I was betrayed, I would still have a way to fight. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for Robert. I was fighting to honor his memory and his love. I got in my car and drove to the bank. The city's chaotic energy, which had felt so overwhelming just hours ago, now felt like a backdrop to my own personal drama. I was a woman on a mission and nothing was going to stop me. What I didn't know was that my trip to the bank would be just the first step in a much larger, more dangerous game. And what I found in that safe deposit box would change my life forever. The bank was a fortress of glass and steel, a testament to the fact that money, more than anything else, is what truly matters in this world. I walked in, my head held high, a woman on a mission. I felt a surge of adrenaline as I approached the counter. I felt like a spy, a secret agent on a mission to save the world. The reality, of course, was much more mundane. I was a 62-year-old widow who had a bone to pick with her son-in-law. But in that moment, I felt invincible. I presented my identification to the teller, a young woman with a bored expression on her face. "I'd like to access my safe deposit box," I said, my voice steady. She looked at the account information and then back at me, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. "Are you Charlotte Hayes?" she asked. "Yes," I said, my heart pounding in my chest. She smiled, a genuine, warm smile that seemed out of place in this cold, sterile environment. "We've been expecting you," she said. My blood ran cold. "Expecting me?" I asked, my voice a whisper. "What do you mean?" "Your husband, Robert," she said, her voice soft. "He left a message for you. He said you would know when the time was right to come here. He also said that whatever you find inside, you should trust it. And that you should know that he loves you very much." My eyes welled up with tears. My husband, even in death, he was still looking out for me. He had known that this day would come. He had known that I would be betrayed, that I would be at my lowest point. He had known all of this, and he had left a message for me, a little note of love and encouragement. The tears flowed freely now, a mix of sadness and relief. I wasn't alone. I had never been alone. The teller led me into a small private room and handed me the key to the safe deposit box. I unlocked it, my hands shaking, and pulled out a small metal box. I took a deep breath and opened it. Inside, there was a single leather-bound journal. I flipped through the pages and my eyes widened. It wasn't just a journal, it was a diary of all of Mark's fraudulent activities, page after page of meticulous detail, all of it in Robert's neat, meticulous handwriting. He had been documenting Mark's crimes for years. I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated triumph. Mark had taken the photocopies, but he hadn't taken the original. He had taken the proof, but he hadn't taken the truth. Robert had been 2 steps ahead of him. He knew that Mark would try to silence me, and he had made sure that even if he succeeded, the truth would still come out. I had a weapon now, a weapon far more powerful than any set of documents. I had the truth, and I had a diary to back it up. I was no longer just a grieving widow. I was a woman on a mission. I was going to expose Mark, and I was going to make sure he paid for what he did, not just for what he did to me, but for what he did to my daughter and for what he did to my husband. The game was on, and this time, I was going to win. This was not the end. It was the beginning of my retribution. What I didn't know was that what happened next would be the most difficult and emotional moment of my life, a confrontation that would change my relationship with my daughter forever. And you won't want to miss it.
With the journal clutched tightly in my hands, I drove home, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. Robert's love letter, his final gift to me, had filled me with a sense of purpose and a profound sadness. He had known, and he had done everything in his power to protect me. Now it was my turn to finish what he started. The drive was a blur, a haze of street lights and passing cars. I felt an exhilarating mix of anger and resolve. Mark had humiliated me, and Jessica had betrayed me. But I was not defeated. I was armed with the truth, and I was going to use it to bring them both down. I got home, my hands shaking as I unlocked the front door. I went to my husband's study, a room I hadn't been in since his death. It felt like a sacred space, a shrine to the man I had loved. I sat at his desk, and I opened the journal again. The pages were filled with his neat, precise handwriting, a chronicle of Mark's deceit. He had documented everything, every fraudulent transaction, every lie, every betrayal. He had even included a list of Mark's business partners, the ones who were being cheated out of their money. It was all there, a roadmap to his downfall. I felt a pang of guilt. I had been so caught up in my own grief, in my own sense of betrayal, that I hadn't seen the truth that was right in front of me. Robert had been fighting this battle alone, and he had died before he could see it through. I felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about honoring his memory. It was about fighting for the man who had fought for me, even from the grave. I picked up the phone and I called David. "I have it," I said, my voice trembling with excitement. "The original. He left a journal with all the details." There was a long silence on the other end. "I'm coming over right now," he said, his voice a low growl. "Don't touch anything. Don't tell anyone you have it. Just wait for me." He arrived within the hour, his face a grim mask. He sat at Robert's desk, and he read through the journal, his eyes widening with every page. "This is a gold mine, Charlotte," he said, his voice full of awe. "This is everything we need. This is a complete roadmap to his downfall. We'll be able to bring him to his knees with this. He'll lose everything, and he'll go to jail for a very long time." I nodded, a sense of relief washing over me. "What about Jessica?" I asked, my voice a small, desperate plea. "Will she be okay?" David looked at me, a glimmer of sympathy in his eyes.
She'll be a victim, Charlotte. She won't go to jail, but she'll lose everything. She'll have to start over. It's the price she'll have to pay for her greed. I felt a pang of sadness. I had tried so hard to protect her, but in the end, it was her own choices that would lead to her downfall. I couldn't help but think about the little girl who had loved a simple locket more than a lavish party. She had been so innocent then, but she had changed. She had become her husband's accomplice, a silent partner in his lies. This was it, the moment of truth. My whole life had been building up to this moment, a final showdown with the man who had taken everything from me. What I didn't know was that while I was sitting there, a new layer to this story was about to be revealed, and I would be forced to make the most difficult decision of my life, something that would change my relationship with my daughter forever. And you won't want to miss it. The knock on my door was sharp, insistent, and unexpected. My heart jumped into my throat. I glanced at the clock. It was nearly midnight. David had just left, the journal tucked safely away in his briefcase. Who in the world could it be? I approached the door cautiously, peeking through the peephole. It was Jessica, my daughter. Her face was a mess of tears, mascara smudged down her cheeks, her hair disheveled. She looked nothing like the polished, put-together woman I had seen at the dinner party. She looked like the frightened little girl I used to tuck into bed. I opened the door, and she stumbled inside, her body shaking with sobs. She collapsed into my arms, a torrent of desperate apologies and raw confessions spilling out. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry," she wailed, her words muffled against my shoulder. "I didn't want to do it. He made me. He said he would leave me if I didn't." I held her tightly, the anger and betrayal I had felt earlier evaporating into a deep, painful pity. She was a victim, just as David had said, not a co-conspirator, not a partner in crime. She was a woman trapped in a cage of her own making, a gilded cage with a monster for a keeper. She pulled away, her eyes red and puffy, and I saw a look of genuine terror in them. "He found out about the documents," she stammered. "He was furious. He said if I didn't help him, he would ruin me. He would take everything, the house, the cars, everything we have. He would leave me with nothing." I felt a fresh wave of rage, this time not at her, but at him, the monster. He had used her, manipulated her, and turned her against her own mother. He was truly a despicable human being. "He's not a monster, Mom," she said, her voice a small, broken whisper. "He's worse. He's a liar. He's a cheat. He's a fraud. And I just found out he's been cheating on me for years. He has another woman. And he's been spending all his money on her. He's been living a double life. And he's been stealing from his own company to pay for it all." My heart sank. A double life. The fraud, the lies, the cheating, it was all connected. It wasn't just about money. It was about a deep-seated pathology, a need to control, to manipulate, to destroy. The man was a human black hole, sucking the life out of everyone around him. "What are you going to do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I don't know," she said, her voice cracking. "I have nothing. I have no money, no job, no friends. Everyone I know is connected to him. I'm going to lose everything. He's going to leave me with nothing." I looked at my daughter, her face a mask of despair, and I knew what I had to do. I had to choose. I could expose Mark, bring him to his knees, and watch as my daughter lost everything she had worked for, or I could find a different way, a way to save her without sacrificing my own revenge, a way to get justice without destroying her life. It was a terrifying choice, but in my heart, I knew there was only one path I could take. I couldn't sacrifice my daughter for the sake of vengeance. I looked at her, and a new plan began to form in my mind, a plan that was bigger than a simple confrontation, a plan that was more complex than a simple legal battle. I would expose him, but I wouldn't do it alone. I would do it with her. I would help her find her own strength, her own voice. I would help her take back her life, and in doing so, I would finally find my own. "Don't worry," I said, a fierce, protective love in my voice. "We're going to get through this together." This was the beginning of our new chapter. We were no longer enemies. We were a team, and we were going to take on the man who had tried to break us both. The final act was about to begin, and it would be more shocking and more triumphant than I could have ever imagined. You have to see what happens next. You won't believe it.